The small coastal town of Windmir sat quietly on the edge of the endless blue sea. It was the kind of place where the waves spoke louder than people, and where stories were told over old wooden tables in the harbor's cafes. Most of those stories were about ships, storms, and sailors who claimed to see strange things on foggy nights. But among them was one story that everyone knew, the story of the Guardian Fleet. The legend said that centuries ago, when the world was still wild and mysterious, humanity built massive warships that protected the oceans from enemies not of this earth. They were said to be gigantic, with armor that could withstand lightning and engines that hummed like thunder. The old fishermen claimed those ships once rose from the sea whenever danger came, saving human settlements before disappearing again beneath the waves. But as the years passed and technology grew, people began to laugh at those tales. They said it was impossible, just another fisherman's fantasy made up to impress children. Captain Elias Ward didn't laugh. He was an old man now, but in his youth, he had served as a naval officer. He had seen things at sea that logic could not explain, strange readings on his radar, ghostly shapes beneath the surface, and whispers over the radio that no one else heard. Even after retirement, those memories followed him. So he settled in Windmir, bought a small boat, and spent his days on the water with his equipment searching for something he couldn't name. Elias was known around town as the captain who talked to the sea. He was quiet, polite, but distant. Children followed him sometimes when he walked to the pier, curious about his strange instruments, an old radar unit, a homemade sonar scanner, and a laptop full of ancient maps. He would smile faintly and tell them, "The ocean keeps secrets and someone has to listen." Most adults rolled their eyes when they heard that. Every evening, Elias would sit by his window, staring at the horizon as the sun melted into the waves. His small home was filled with naval charts, newspaper clippings, and dusty notebooks full of calculations. He compared ancient sailor logs with modern satellite data, trying to find connections. One name appeared again and again in the old texts: the Guardian Fleet. Some records even mentioned exact coordinates in the deep ocean, far beyond modern exploration zones. The more he studied, the more he felt something was waiting down there. One morning, Elias took his boat farther out than usual. The air was calm, the sea perfectly still. He turned on his sonar scanner and waited as the machine hummed softly. The screen flickered, then a faint rhythmic pulse appeared, a repeating signal from deep beneath the surface. It wasn't random. It came in clear intervals, steady as a heartbeat. Elias frowned and leaned closer. He tapped the side of the screen, thinking it was an error, but the signal continued. He checked his coordinates, and his heart skipped a beat. The location matched one of the sites mentioned in the old sailor logs. When he returned to shore, Elias went straight to the town's small naval research office. He showed them his recordings, his data, and his notes. The young officer on duty looked at him kindly, but with a hint of amusement. "Captain, these readings could be anything. A whale pod, an underwater current, or maybe a sonar echo bouncing off a trench," the officer said. Elias shook his head. "No, son. That's a code. It's repeating, organized. Someone, or something, is sending it." The officer promised to forward the report to headquarters, but Elias knew it would be ignored. Days turned into weeks, and Elias kept returning to the same spot. Every time the pulse was there, sometimes stronger, sometimes faint. He tried to decode it using old naval ciphers, convinced it was a message left long ago. But as news spread around town, people began to mock him. At the diner, fishermen would chuckle and say, "Hey, Captain, did the sea talk to you again today?" Some of them started calling him Ghost Hunter. He didn't mind much, though sometimes the laughter hurt. Still, Elias refused to stop. Late one night, he sat alone on the pier, listening to the wind. The waves glowed faintly under the moonlight, and the sea seemed alive with whispers. He thought about the legends his grandfather once told him, stories of human warships so powerful they scared away creatures from the stars. He wondered if humanity had simply forgotten its own history. Maybe the world had grown too arrogant to believe in anything that couldn't be explained. A few days later, A local TV crew came to interview him. They wanted to do a short segment called The Man Who Searches for Ghost Ships. The reporter smiled politely, but kept asking questions that made him sound like a fool. Elias stayed calm, explaining his findings and the pattern in the signals. But when the segment aired, it was edited to look like a comedy piece. People laughed even more. Children imitated him, pretending to hold radios to their ears and saying, "The sea is calling." That night, Elias sat by his window again, staring at the dark ocean. His radio equipment was on, and through the static he could still hear it, the same steady pulse coming from the deep. He smiled sadly and whispered, "I hear you. I'm still here." Outside, a soft mist began to roll in, covering the coastline. The air felt heavy, charged with something ancient. The next morning, the townsfolk woke to find that Elias's boat was already gone from the harbor. He had sailed out before dawn, following the signal once again. Most assumed he was chasing another illusion. But out there on the open sea, surrounded by miles of silence, Elias felt a strange calm. The sonar pulse had changed. It was faster now, as if responding to him. He leaned over the edge of the boat and looked down into the dark water. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a shadow move far beneath the surface, something impossibly large. His heart pounded, but he didn't feel fear. Instead, he felt a sense of recognition, like he was standing on the edge of history. The water around his boat began to ripple slightly, though there was no wind. Elias reached for his radio and tried to record the sound again, but the device crackled and cut out. The pulse was too strong now, filling the air with a deep vibration that made the boat tremble. He whispered to himself, "They said you were a myth. But you're real, aren't you?" When he returned to shore that evening, he looked exhausted, but strangely peaceful. The townspeople asked what he had found, but he only smiled and said, "The sea remembers." He uploaded all his data to his private servers, labeling the file Guardian Sequence Era 1. Then he locked his research room and went for a long walk along the cliffs. From there he could see the horizon, endless and quiet, and he knew the world would soon have to face a truth it had long ignored. For now, the people of Windmir still laughed at their legends, still dismissed the stories told by old sailors. But beneath the calm surface of the ocean, deep where sunlight could not reach, something ancient was stirring. The rhythmic pulse continued, steady, patient, and alive, waiting for someone who still believed to finally listen. And somewhere, out there far below the waves, the metal hull of a forgotten warship waited in silence, its systems dormant but not dead. The Guardian fleet was not just a legend, it was history, buried beneath the sea, waiting for the day it would rise again. Days passed after Captain Elias Ward's last trip to sea, but his thoughts couldn't rest. Every night he replayed the strange pulse he had recorded, the deep rhythmic beat that sounded like a heartbeat coming from the ocean's floor. The sound haunted him. It wasn't random, it wasn't natural. It was too perfect, too regular. It was a pattern. He sat for hours in his study, listening to it through his headphones, noting down the intervals on paper, drawing lines and numbers on the walls until his small room looked like a web of secrets. Outside, Windmir went on with its quiet life. The fishermen sailed, the market buzzed, and tourists came to take photos of the cliffs. No one cared about the strange signals Elias had found. When he walked through town, people would smile politely but whisper behind his back. "There goes the captain with his ghost ships again," they'd say. But Elias didn't care about their words anymore. He knew what he had heard, and he knew it was real. One afternoon, he decided to contact an old friend, Dr. Miriam Clark, a marine researcher who worked at the Naval Institute in the city. Miriam had once been his student, back when he taught sonar technology and deep-sea exploration. He trusted her judgment. Elias sent her the recordings, the coordinates, and his notes, along with a message that simply read, "Tell me if you hear it too." 3 days later, Miriam called him. Her voice was calm but curious. "Elias, I listened to your recording," she said. "It's strange. It's definitely not whale song or seismic activity. The pattern is too structured." But the frequency is old. Very old. The kind used by early military sonar systems. Are you sure you didn't record an echo from a wreck or an old beacon? Elias sighed. Miriam, I've been at sea all my life. This isn't an echo. It's a live signal. Something down there is still transmitting. Miriam promised to run the data through the Institute's systems, but when she presented it to her superiors, they laughed. The director dismissed it, saying, "The old man is chasing fairy tales. Tell him to enjoy his retirement." Still, Miriam couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. She sent Elias a short reply. "Keep recording. Something about this doesn't add up." Encouraged, Elias returned to the sea almost every day. He took his small boat beyond the bay, past the fishing routes into waters where few locals ever ventured. The sea there was darker, deeper, and strangely quiet. Each time he lowered his sonar scanner and waited. The pulse was always there, steady, faithful, like it was waiting for him. But one evening, something changed. The signal doubled. Instead of one rhythmic beat, there were now two, overlapping slightly, like two hearts beating in sync. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He checked his equipment again, thinking it was an error, but everything was functioning perfectly. He recorded the new signal and looked at his screen. Two sources, several kilometers apart, both deep under the sea floor. He whispered to himself, "There's more than one." He returned home late that night, his hands shaking with excitement. He plotted the coordinates on his map, marking each with a red dot. As he stepped back, he noticed the dots formed a pattern, a curved line stretching across the ocean trench. To anyone else, it might look random, but to Elias, it looked like formation data, a fleet pattern, a formation used by warships. The next morning, Elias went to the town's small cafe, hoping to share his discovery with someone who might understand. But as soon as he began talking, people around him laughed. "Fleet pattern? Captain, that's too many late nights with your radio," one fisherman joked. Another added, "Maybe the mermaids are calling your name." Even the cafe owner, who usually respected him, said gently, "Elias, maybe it's time to rest. You've been out there too long." Elias left quietly, though his heart felt heavy. He had spent his whole life at sea, serving his country, protecting people. And now no one believed him. But that night, as he sat alone, he made himself a promise. "If they won't listen, I'll prove it myself." He upgraded his equipment, attaching a new hydrophone system and a camera drone capable of diving deeper than before. The following weekend, he set out again, this time prepared to record everything. The weather was calm, the sky clear, but the sea had an uneasy stillness. It felt as if the ocean was holding its breath. Hours passed without anything unusual, until suddenly his sonar flared to life. The pulse was stronger now, louder, clearer. Elias leaned over his device, watching the signal spike. It wasn't coming from one place anymore. The entire area beneath him seemed alive with faint echoes, like multiple transmitters activating at once. He felt his boat vibrate slightly, the metal railing humming under his hand. Then the water around him began to shimmer faintly. Not light exactly, but a soft distortion, as if heat waves were rising from the sea itself. Elias quickly launched his underwater drone and guided it into the depths. The live feed flickered on his laptop screen, showing endless darkness. Then slowly shapes began to appear, outlines of massive structures half buried in the sand. They looked like metal hulls, rusted and ancient but enormous. His breath caught in his throat. "It's them," he whispered. The camera drifted closer to one of the structures, revealing an emblem on its side, a faded insignia shaped like a winged shield. Before he could capture more footage, the drone's screen turned to static. A burst of interference cut through his headset, nearly deafening him. The sonar emitted a sharp beep, a new signal. But this one wasn't coming from below. It was coming from somewhere far away, answering the first. Elias stared at his instruments, realizing the impossible. The deep signal wasn't just transmitting. It was communicating. Something out there had heard it. Back on shore, the interference affected more than just his equipment. Several fishermen reported that their radios had gone dead that same hour. A few even claimed to hear strange tones beneath the static, like coded messages. But when they mentioned it, people laughed again, blaming faulty wiring. Elias sent the data to Miriam immediately. Hours later, she called him, her voice shaking slightly. "Elias, what did you do? Your signal caused interference in half the regional grid. Whatever you found, it's not small. These frequencies. They're military grade, but they don't match any known system. Elias told her about the metal structures, the insignia, the new pulse. There was silence on the line for a long moment before Miriam whispered, "You might have found something lost to history." But not everyone reacted the same way. A few days later, a black car arrived in Windmir. Two men in dark suits visited Elias's home, claiming to be from the Maritime Safety Division. They asked questions, too many questions, about his recordings, his drone, and the exact coordinates of his findings. Elias noticed that they avoided saying who they really worked for. When he refused to give them his full data, one of the men smiled coldly and said, "Some things are best left under the sea, Captain." Then they left. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat outside listening to the distant crash of waves. The pulse still echoed faintly through his equipment. He wondered why those men cared so much, unless they already knew something. Perhaps the Guardian fleet had never been forgotten, only hidden. Maybe the government had known all along. He looked out toward the dark horizon. The ocean was calm again, but the silence felt unnatural, too heavy. He could feel it in his bones, and something was coming. The signals had grown stronger for a reason. Maybe the ships weren't just relics. Maybe they were waking up. As the wind picked up, Elias heard a faint hum, almost like an engine starting far below the water. He turned his head toward the sound, his eyes narrowing. For the first time, he wasn't just searching anymore, and he was being answered. The old legends were no longer just stories. They were warnings that everyone had ignored. And now the ocean was beginning to remember. Elias took a deep breath and whispered, "You're not alone down there, are you?" The sea, dark and endless, gave no reply, but somewhere beneath its surface something stirred, sending another pulse into the deep, louder than ever before. The storm came without warning. The sky over Windmir turned dark in the middle of the day, and the sea that had been calm only hours before began to twist and churn. Fishermen rushed to pull their boats back to shore, and the waves crashed against the rocks with a sound like thunder. The townspeople gathered along the coast, watching the black clouds roll in, wondering why the weather had changed so suddenly. But Captain Elias Ward knew deep down that this was no ordinary storm. He had been feeling it for days, the strange pressure in the air, the signals growing louder through his radio, the vibration that made his windows shake even when the wind was still. Something beneath the sea was waking up, and the storm was just the beginning. Elias stood on the pier, his coat whipping in the wind, staring at the horizon. His old radar device buzzed wildly, showing readings that made no sense. "It's not wind. It's not lightning," he murmured. The frequencies he had been tracking were now everywhere, overlapping, building into one powerful signal that made the whole device glow faintly blue. The sea itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with the sound. He turned and saw people shouting, running to their homes, pulling their children away from the beach. The rain started to fall in sheets and thunder rolled across the sky. But beneath the thunder was another sound, deep, metallic and haunting, as if something enormous was moving far below the surface. Elias felt his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed his small radio and tried to call the naval station, but all he got was static mixed with that same strange rhythmic pulse. By the time night fell, the storm had reached its peak. The waves crashed higher than any storm Windmir had ever seen. The sky was split with flashes of blue-white lightning that didn't look natural. It had a strange electric pattern, almost geometric. Elias could feel his boat straining against its ropes at the dock. He knew he should stay inside, but curiosity and instinct pushed him forward. He untied the ropes and climbed aboard, determined to see where the signals were coming from. The moment he left the harbor, the rain hit him like cold knives. He steered toward the open sea, following the beeping of his radar. The waves tossed his boat up and down like a toy, but Elias held on, shouting into the wind. "Come on, show yourself," he yelled. Then, just as he crossed the boundary where the shallow waters dropped into the deep trench, the storm grew silent. The wind stopped. The rain slowed. For a moment, everything was still. Elias looked around in confusion. The clouds above him swirled slowly, glowing faintly with blue light. The sea, though dark, was calm, too calm. His radar began to flash violently, the beeping now one continuous sound. He leaned over the side of his boat, staring into the depths. And then, from the black water below, a faint light appeared. At first it was small, like a single point of blue deep under the waves. But then it spread, growing larger, brighter, until the entire sea beneath him glowed. Shapes began to form. Vast metallic outlines stretching for hundreds of meters. Elias's breath caught in his throat. "No, it can't be," he whispered. The light grew stronger until it was almost blinding. Through the glowing water he could see the massive structure rising slowly from the deep. A warship, ancient and rusted, its hull covered in strange markings. Barnacles and coral clung to its sides, but beneath them, he could still see the metal, solid and alive. Water poured off its decks as it broke the surface, the noise echoing across the ocean like 1,000 drums. Elias fell back in awe, his eyes wide. The ship was enormous, far larger than anything built in modern times. The hull carried the same winged shield emblem he had seen on his drone footage. The Guardian fleet, it was real. The legends were true. The air filled with a deep humming sound as lights flickered across the ship's surface. Elias could feel the vibration in his chest. The ship's engines were activating. One by one, panels along its sides opened, releasing streams of vapor into the air. Blue energy lines began to glow faintly across its hull, tracing patterns like veins. The storm clouds above responded, lightning flashing in time with the pulsing energy below. Suddenly, a beam of light shot upward from the warship, piercing through the clouds. It wasn't just light, it was data, a signal, a call. Elias's radar exploded with readings, his laptop screen filled with lines of code he couldn't understand. "It's calling. It's sending something," he said aloud. The realization hit him. The ship was broadcasting a distress signal, but not to any human receiver. It was reaching for something else. Far above, through the clearing clouds, a faint glow appeared, something descending from the sky. Elias stared in disbelief. It looked like a second storm forming in the air, but it wasn't made of clouds. It was light, moving, shifting, alive. The blue energy from the warship seemed to stretch upward toward it, connecting sea and sky in one glowing thread. On shore, the people of Windmir could see it too. They watched in horror and amazement as a column of light rose from the ocean and touched the clouds. Children cried, adults prayed, and some simply stood frozen, unable to speak. The entire sky flickered, as if reacting to whatever was happening in the sea. Elias could barely hold his camera steady, but he managed to capture short bursts of footage. The ship, the beam, the strange object forming above. He knew no one would believe him otherwise. His hands trembled, his heart raced. He felt like he was witnessing something from another world. Then came the sound, a deep, metallic roar that made the sea itself shudder. The warship's guns, long silent, rotated slowly, locking into place. The lights along its sides changed from blue to white. The radar on Elias's screen showed movement, objects rising from the ocean floor all around him. He looked over the edge and saw dark shapes emerging in the glowing water. More ships, all enormous, all bearing the same symbol. The Guardian fleet wasn't just one ship. It was an entire armada. Elias could hardly breathe. The ships formed a wide circle around him, their engines humming softly, their lights flickering in unison. He felt tiny and powerless, like an insect before a giant. Then suddenly the sky above cracked open with a sound like glass breaking. A massive flash of white light burst through the clouds, and a colossal shape began to descend. Through the blinding glow, Elias could see it. Not human, not natural. It was an alien craft, enormous, its surface smooth and dark like obsidian. It hovered silently above the warships, its underside glowing with patterns that matched the pulse Elias had been tracking for months. The alien craft answered the signal. It had come. For a moment, everything was still. The warships below and the alien vessel above, facing each other across the divide between ocean and sky. Then, without warning, the air trembled as the human warship fired. A beam of white energy shot upward, hitting the alien craft squarely in its center. The sound was deafening. The clouds burst apart from the impact, and waves surged outward in all directions. Elias was thrown to the deck of his boat. He clung to the railing as the sea exploded around him, his ears ringing. When he looked up again, the alien craft was still hovering, but its glow had dimmed. The warship fired again, this time releasing smaller drones that darted into the sky like bolts of lightning. The alien vessel responded, firing beams of its own, striking the ocean and sending geysers of steam into the air. The night had turned into a battlefield, one between forgotten human machines and something not of this world. Elias knew he had to get away, but he couldn't take his eyes off the scene. He felt both terrified and awed. The Guardian fleet wasn't a legend. It was a warning from the past, a defense built for a war humanity had forgotten. And now that war had returned. As the battle raged, one of the smaller warships turned slightly, and its massive searchlight passed over Elias's boat. For an instant he felt the light hit him, warm, heavy, almost intelligent. His radio crackled to life and a distorted voice whispered through the static, "Human presence detected. Observation recorded." Then the light moved away and the voice was gone. Elias finally started his engine and turned toward the shore. Behind him, the sky burned with strange blue fire. He could hear explosions echoing across the sea, but when he looked back one last time, all he saw was light. Bright, blinding light spreading from the center of the battle. Then everything went silent again. The light faded, the wind returned, and the storm slowly began to die. By dawn, the ocean was calm once more. The people of Windmir found debris washed up along the shore, fragments of metal they didn't recognize glowing faintly before turning to ash. Elias stood among them, soaked, exhausted but alive. He said nothing. The others asked what had happened, but he just looked out at the horizon, where the sea met the rising sun. Somewhere out there, he knew, the warship still waited beneath the waves, silent, but not gone. The legends had been right all along, and now the world would have to face the truth that had slept under the sea for centuries, a truth that had finally awakened. The morning after the storm, the sea looked peaceful again, but everyone in Windmir could feel that something was wrong. The waves were too quiet, the air too still. People walked along the beach, picking up strange pieces of metal that had washed ashore, black fragments that shimmered faintly, like they were alive. Some burned to the touch. Others hummed with a faint vibration before crumbling into dust. The fishermen whispered to each other, saying the storm wasn't a storm at all. They had seen the flashes of light far out at sea, the shapes that rose and disappeared, and the column of blue fire that had lit the sky. But when reporters came from the city, the government gave only one explanation: a weather anomaly. Elias Ward didn't speak to anyone. He stayed in his house for 2 days, staring at the sea through his window. His eyes were dark and tired, his face pale. He kept replaying the images in his head: the warship rising from the water, the alien craft in the sky, the battle that had turned the night into day. He could still feel the vibration of the engines, hear the low hum that had filled the air. He had proof, videos, recordings, radar data, but something inside him told him not to share it yet. Not until he understood what it all meant. On the 3rd day, a helicopter flew over Windmir and landed near the harbor. Soldiers stepped out, dressed in dark gray uniforms. They didn't speak to the townspeople. They went straight to the shore, collected every strange fragment they could find, and loaded it into sealed containers. Then they left as quickly as they came. People asked questions, but no one got answers. That night, Elias received a message from Dr. Miriam Clark. Her voice was low, almost whispering. "Elias, I saw the footage. I don't know how you survived that storm, but whatever you recorded, it's not supposed to exist. The military has locked down the whole region. They're calling it an energy interference zone. Please don't go back out there." Elias paused before replying. "Miriam, it's already too late. Something has awakened. They're trying to hide it," she sighed. "Elias, listen to me. That signal you sent me before the storm, it didn't just go out to the ocean. It went into space. Someone or something answered it." Elias's heart sank. "You mean the alien craft?" he asked. Miriam hesitated. "No, Elias, that wasn't the only one." Outside, the sea glowed faintly under the moonlight. The waves moved in slow, unnatural patterns, as if something deep below was shifting. Elias stepped outside, listening. There it was again, that same pulse, faint but steady. It hadn't stopped. He grabbed his radio and turned it on. The static filled the air, then slowly cleared into the familiar rhythmic signal. But now there was something new mixed in. A second pattern, faster, stronger, like a response. Elias froze. The warship was transmitting again. The next morning, ships appeared on the horizon. Modern Navy vessels, gray and silent, moving in formation toward the area where the storm had happened. Windmir's people gathered along the cliffs watching them. Dozens of destroyers, carriers, and surveillance ships lined the sea. Helicopters circled above, dropping sonar buoys into the water. It was clear the government was preparing for something big. Elias couldn't stay on shore any longer. He packed his radar, his laptop, and his camera, then headed to the harbor. His old boat was damaged from the storm, but it still floated. As he prepared to leave, a fisherman grabbed his arm. "Captain, don't go out there again," the man said nervously. "The sea isn't safe. The Navy's blocking everything." Elias looked at him calmly. "They can block the surface, but not the truth." He set off before dawn, following the faint pulse on his radar. The Navy ships were still miles away when he reached the deep trench again. The water was dark, almost black. Elias slowed his engine and dropped his sonar scanner. The readings spiked instantly. The signal was stronger than ever. The screen glowed with symbols he didn't recognize, patterns forming and breaking apart like a code being written in real time. His hands trembled. Then, without warning, the sea began to rise. A low rumble echoed through the air and bubbles broke the surface all around him. Elias's boat rocked violently as a massive shape pushed up from below. It was another ship, smaller than the one he'd seen before, but clearly part of the same fleet. Its hull was covered in thick sea growth, but the lights along its sides were glowing faintly. The insignia of the winged shield was still visible. The ship was alive again. As the warship rose fully above the surface, a voice came through Elias's radio. Not a human voice, but a deep, mechanical one, distorted and slow. "Unit 7, operational. Waiting command." Elias stared at the radio, his mouth dry. "Who's giving the command?" he whispered. The voice replied, "Signal received. External origin. Identifying. Unknown." Suddenly, the sea around him shimmered with light. The Navy ships were approaching fast, their spotlights cutting through the mist. Elias could hear their engines, their loudspeakers ordering him to leave the area immediately. But before he could respond, the old warship's lights turned from blue to red. The deep voice returned, louder now. "Warning, hostile presence detected. Activating defense protocol." A low hum filled the air as panels on the ship's deck opened, revealing strange metallic drones. They hovered above the water like glowing orbs, spinning slowly. The Navy ships halted, unsure of what they were seeing. Then one of the orbs shot into the air, leaving a trail of light behind it. The sky lit up with a blinding flash. Within seconds, chaos broke out. The Navy's radar systems failed, their communications jammed. The warship wasn't attacking them directly. It was defending itself. Elias shouted into his radio, trying to warn them. "Don't fire. It's automatic defense and it's reacting to your signals." But no one heard him. A single missile launched from one of the Navy ships, streaking toward the warship. The explosion that followed was deafening, but when the smoke cleared, the warship was untouched. A shimmering energy field surrounded it, bending light like glass. Then from the clouds above, the alien craft returned. It descended slowly, its dark surface glowing with the same strange light as before. The warship's systems flared to life in response, the air filling with electricity. Elias could see both forces, human technology from the distant past and alien power from beyond Earth, facing each other once again. The alien ship sent down beams of light that scanned the warship, searching, analyzing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the warship responded, its weapons glowing white-hot. A voice echoed again through Elias's radio. "Defense priority, protect humanity. Threat level, high." The ship fired. A beam of pure energy shot upward, striking the alien craft. The explosion lit up the entire horizon. The Navy ships backed away, engines roaring as waves crashed against their sides. Elias held onto his boat, shouting into the wind, "Stop! You're not enemies." But neither side could hear him. The warship kept firing, the alien craft dodging, its counterattack striking the sea, sending geysers of steam into the air. Suddenly, the warship's energy shield flickered. The alien craft released a pulse of light that spread across the ocean, disabling every modern ship in its path. Elias's radar went blank, his boat's engine stopped. The air was filled with silence, broken only by the hum of power between the two giants. Then, as if in answer to some unseen command, the warship stopped firing. Its lights dimmed and the voice on the radio spoke one last time. "Transmission complete. Message delivered. Awaiting response." The alien craft hovered for a moment, then slowly began to retreat, rising higher into the sky until it disappeared into the clouds. The warship's lights faded completely and it began to sink back into the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves just as it had before. When the Navy finally reached the area, there was nothing left but calm water and a few ripples. The radar screen showed no trace of any vessel, human or otherwise. Elias sat alone on his boat staring at the sea. He felt tears in his eyes, though he didn't know why. Maybe it was awe, maybe fear, maybe the weight of knowing he had witnessed something no one else truly could understand. By the time he returned to shore, officials were already there waiting. They took his equipment, his recordings, even his notes. They told him to keep quiet for national security. Elias didn't argue. He knew that even if he told the truth, no one would believe him. The world wasn't ready to accept that the legends of the Guardian fleet were real, that humanity had once built weapons strong enough to challenge visitors from the stars. That night, as Elias walked along the beach, he looked out at the dark water. The sea was calm again, reflecting the stars above. Somewhere deep below, the warship rested, silent and waiting. The alien craft was gone, but the signal still pulsed faintly through his radio. Slower now, softer, like a heartbeat fading into sleep. Elias smiled sadly and whispered, "Rest now, old Guardian. You did your duty." And in the far distance, where the sea met the sky, a faint blue glow appeared for just a moment, then vanished into the deep. Weeks passed after the night the warship disappeared beneath the waves. Windmir slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The fishermen went back to their boats, the markets reopened, and tourists once again came to watch the calm sea. But beneath the surface, something had changed. People could still feel it, an invisible tension in the air, as if the ocean itself was keeping a secret. Every night, the waves glowed faintly blue for a few seconds, then faded away, leaving the beach in silence. Elias Ward lived in isolation now, his small cottage filled with old equipment and empty coffee cups. The government had confiscated all his original data, but they hadn't taken everything. He still had one small recorder, hidden under a loose floorboard that had captured the final seconds of the transmission. Sometimes late at night he would play it back. The signal was faint, broken by static, but he could still hear the pulse, the steady beat of something alive, waiting. He didn't tell anyone, not even Dr. Miriam Clark, who had been calling him almost every day since the event. Miriam, meanwhile, had been trying to trace the strange energy reading that had appeared during the confrontation. She found something unusual. The energy pattern wasn't of alien origin or human technology. It was a combination of both, as if the warship and the alien craft had shared information during their final exchange. The message they sent wasn't an attack. It was communication. But to whom? That question haunted her. Elias finally agreed to meet her in the city. When they sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, she looked tired, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "Elias," she said softly, "what you saw out there wasn't just a fight. It was a conversation, one that's still going on." Elias frowned. "You mean the signal?" She nodded. "Yes, the frequency you recorded didn't stop, it spread. It's bouncing between satellites, even reaching deep space probes. It's like it's looking for something. Or someone." Elias sat back, feeling a chill run through him. "If it's looking for someone," he said slowly, "then maybe it's not over." Miriam looked down at her hands. "That's what I'm afraid of." Later that night, Elias returned to Windmir. The town looked peaceful under the moonlight. He walked down to the beach and listened to the waves. For the first time in weeks, the sea was completely still. No wind, no sound, just the faint hum of the world at rest. Then, from far out in the distance, a deep tone echoed across the water, soft at first, then growing louder. Elias froze. The sound was the same as the pulse on his recorder. He pulled the small device from his pocket and switched it on. The sound matched perfectly. Whatever it was calling again. He ran back to his house and turned on his radar equipment. The screen lit up instantly with a single signal. Not from beneath the sea this time, but from high above the earth. A slow, rhythmic beacon flashing in a pattern he recognized. It was the same code the warship had used before, but this time it was coming from space. Elias stared at the coordinates and realized with a shock that it was near Mars. He immediately called Miriam. "You need to see this," he said breathlessly. Within hours, she was online with him, watching the same radar feed. "It's the same frequency," she whispered. "But it's impossible. How could the warship signal be coming from there?" Elias looked at her with a strange calm. Maybe the message wasn't just sent. Maybe it was received. The following week, reports began to surface around the world. Strange objects seen in the night sky, radio interference, satellites going offline for minutes at a time. Governments denied everything, calling it solar activity, but people began to record videos showing flashes of light high in the atmosphere, shapes that disappeared when approached. It was subtle at first, but Elias knew what it meant. The legends of the Guardian fleet weren't myths. They were warnings. One night, as a storm gathered over the coast, Elias received a final message on his recorder. It played automatically even though he hadn't touched it. The voice that came through was faint and mechanical, but human enough to be understood. Elias Ward, Guardian protocol active. Monitoring initiated. The cycle continues. He felt his blood run cold. The voice sounded old, like an echo from the past, but it spoke his name. He rewound the tape and listened again. It said the same words each time. He ran outside into the rain, looking out over the dark ocean. Lightning flashed, and for a brief second, he thought he saw something far out on the horizon. The faint outline of a ship, rising and sinking with the waves. It was there for only a moment, then gone again. Elias fell to his knees, laughing and crying at the same time. "You're still out there," he whispered. Over the next days, the world began to notice more signs. In deep-sea research stations, sensors detected unexplained movements at extreme depths. Submarines reported sonar contacts that vanished when pursued. Astronomers picked up faint signals repeating the same ancient code from different parts of the solar system. It became clear that something vast and organized was stirring. Not invasion, but awakening. Miriam traveled to Windmir to find Elias. When she arrived, his house was empty. The door was open, the equipment still running. The last thing recorded on his camera was a faint light appearing over the sea, followed by his voice saying, "I have to see it one last time." After that, nothing. He was never seen again. The government searched for him for weeks but found no trace. His boat was gone and so was the recorder. The only thing left was a note on his desk. It had just 4 words written in his careful handwriting. "They are watching us." Months passed. The sea grew quiet again. Windmir went back to its sleepy routine, though people still whispered about the man who vanished chasing legends. Miriam never stopped looking. She spent her nights decoding the old Warship signals, trying to understand what the Guardian protocol meant. Then one night, as she sat alone in her lab, her computer screen flickered. The old signal reappeared, slow, steady, and stronger than ever. It was coming from somewhere in the Atlantic, moving east toward Europe. The source name on the screen read simply, Human Guardian 7. Miriam stared at it, her heart pounding. The warship hadn't been destroyed. It had gone somewhere, perhaps beneath the ocean floor, perhaps to another place entirely. And now it was moving again. The words monitoring initiated echoed in her mind. She realized then that the warship had never been a weapon of destruction. It had been a sentinel, built to defend Earth from unseen threats. The legends said humanity once made a pact, to protect not only themselves but the balance between worlds. She looked out her window at the night sky. The stars shimmered faintly through the thin clouds. Somewhere up there, she knew the other side of the message was listening too. A month later, a news story appeared briefly online before being deleted. A research satellite orbiting Mars had detected a massive metallic structure near one of the poles. The report described it as artificial and partially active. The image showed something buried in ice, a ship, shaped almost exactly like the Guardian warship. Within hours, all data was classified, but the few who saw it before it vanished recognized the insignia on its side, a winged shield glowing faintly blue. Miriam closed her laptop and whispered into the silence. "They're preparing." Far beneath the Atlantic in the cold darkness, a faint blue light flickered to life. Metal plates shifted, engines hummed softly, and the ancient warship opened its eyes once more. The voice that had once spoken to Elias echoed through the void, calm, powerful, eternal. Monitoring complete. Human activity stable, awaiting next cycle. And then, for the first time in thousands of years, a second voice answered. Not human, but clear and intelligent. Acknowledged, Guardian. The stars remember. Above the ocean, the waves rose and fell gently, as if breathing. The wind carried no sound but the quiet rhythm of the sea, a heartbeat that would never stop. Humanity went on with its life, unaware that deep below and high above, Old watchers guarded their world, silent but awake. Somewhere in the endless space beyond Mars, a small blue light blinked, a signal sent from one guardian to another. The legend of the human warship was no longer a myth. It had become a promise,